To start the evening off, this is the third and final guest of our Visiting Writer Series for the fall semester, Poe Ballantine, a nonfiction writer, and a fiction writer too, but he'll be reading from his nonfiction work tonight. Please, if you have a cell phone on, turn it off right now. Please, please, please. No extraneous sound. And remember that after the reading, after the presentation, there are books for sale in the lobby, and there will be a signing here. So you can purchase one of the author's books or any other book, have them signed here. Please do take advantage of that. And now I'll ask Ryan Flanagan, a doctoral student in creative nonfiction, to come up and introduce our guest. Thanks.
A few years ago, I was reading this book, and it was funny that out of the 20 essays in here, the only one I really loved was by an author who I had never heard of before. The plot was simple. It was the chronicle of a man who takes a Greyhound from Vermont to Kentucky, bets on some ponies at Churchill Downs, and then moves on, buys another one-way bus ticket for Iowa. On another level, it's the story of a man who's leaving his old ways behind, reading obscure essays and the Hindu Vedas for spiritual clues, and in the meantime, living in cheap motels, budgeting $3 a day for food. But on yet another level, it's the story not of a man, but of a human being, one who lives in his head, one who, as he says, can do only what he knows how to do, continue on with his crude pilgrimages of moving, searching, and starting over without knowing much for certain about his human existence. As I read more of his work, I saw this essay was no anomaly. Poe Ballantine's writing is filled with a warmth, a humility, an honesty that never resorts to fireworks or gimmicks. The language is deceptively simple and conversational, but somewhere along the way we understand that it's not so much about the odd jobs he works or the characters he meets, but rather about being human. We understand the author writes not from any impulse to impress the reader, but from his sheer wonder at the experience of trying to live a human life. We understand that we are not with a narrator who's been pent up in academia, but instead one who's been living as variously as possible, as grittily as possible, and as a result, one who has something profoundly human to offer us on the page. In 30 different states, Poe Ballantine has held at least 75 different jobs, which might have been working 2 months at a sheet metal house in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, or one day of road patching in sunny Springfield, Ohio, or the time in Niagara Falls when he was paid $20 to help unload a moving van. He's cooked in 18 restaurants, held a dozen janitorial jobs, worked in 5 factories and 4 or 5 warehouses. He's been a painter and a carpenter, pizza delivery guy, hospital orderly, pest controller, carpet cleaner, bartender, truck driver, and shipbuilder. One time he taught English in Mexico because, as he says, it was the only job that paid the big bucks, $2 an hour. Poe Ballantine's work has been published in the Atlantic Monthly, The Sun, Kenyon Review, and the Coal City Review. His work has several Pushcart and O. Henry nominations and has appeared once in Best American Stories and twice in Best American Essays. Tom Robbins says that his prose cuts right to the bone, but manages to preserve not only the sweetest meat, but the barbecue sauce as well. Cheryl Strayed calls him brilliant, sensitive, unique, and invigorating. He is utterly transparent on the page, she says, a rare thing like a bird that's almost, but not quite extinct. Poe Ballantine is the author of 2 novels, God Clobbers Us All and Decline of the Lawrence Welk Empire, and 2 essay collections, Things I Like About America and 501 Minutes to Christ. Earlier this year, he published his first memoir, Love and Terror on the Howling Plains of Nowhere, which takes place in Chadron, Nebraska, where he currently lives with his wife and son. Please help me to welcome Poe Ballantine.
Hi, how are you? Thanks for coming. I broke a cardinal rule. I'm leaving my cell phone on because the town, the 5,000 where I live, a lot of them are reading this book or have read it, are going to read it. Some are not happy. So hence the 3 lawsuits, the threat of a punch in the nose, a smear campaign. My house was vandalized last week. And Donnie, the barber, who has the barber shop one building south of the pawn shop there, pulled up in front of my house the other day after I had returned home from bringing my son to school, and he shook this book at me. He said, "Did you write this?" And I said, "Yes, I did." And then he started to tell me about his daughter who had a lot of health problems and many recent surgeries. And I thought, well, he's going to ask me for some money. He's come to the wrong guy. But then he started to tell me that his daughter was being bullied at school because I said his barbershop had titty magazines in it. And he said, in 27 years, I have never had any titty magazines in this, in my barbershop. And so all of a sudden I realized that I was the scapegoat for all of his problems. But he went on for a long time, just very furious with me. And he was going to file a lawsuit. And I was the reason that I had ruined his reputation, and I'd ruined his business, and his daughter was being bullied at school. And then he said, "Someone is looking for you." And he said that very ominously. So anyway, I'm leaving my cell phone on because my wife and son are at home now alone. And I've got a lot of people looking out for me. But if the phone rings, and I hope it doesn't, then you'll forgive me. One thing, I'm just going to read I don't want to bore you, so I'll read a little bit. They're short chapters, and then I'll talk a little bit. And if there's, at any point, if you have a question, just put up your hand. You mentioned Tom Robbins. I don't want to name drop, but he came to see me read along with 16 other people at Elliott Bay, which is, the classic bookstore there in Seattle. I didn't know who he was. I was just introducing myself, and I said hi, and he said, "I'm Tom Robbins," and I said, "Wow," and I knew it was Tom, the Tom Robbins, and he said some really nice things about my work. And then when this a few years later, this book came out. We were hunting for blurbs. I hate blurbs, but you got to do blurbs to sell your book. So I asked him. I wrote to him. I forgot his address, and I asked him if he would give me a blurb for my book. His vision has deteriorated so much now that he can't read a book. So I just asked him if I could use the thing he said, which was that my writing knocked his socks off or whatever it was, and he said, "Of course." And then he gave me another blurb without even reading the book. I was so grateful that I made an audio version of this. I also gave it to my blind father. Those are the only 2 people who have audio versions of this book. But a friend of mine who's Italian read it, and he pointed out the 2 mistakes that I'd made. One was that I pronounced the word sotto voce. And I tried to think of, and I argued with him. Of course, that's how you pronounce it. But I argued with him because there's a rule in English, and there aren't very many grammatical rules that hold. But when you have 2 vowels, 2 consonants together, the vowel preceding it is almost always long. And I couldn't think of an exception. But somebody came up with an exception the other night. So if you can think of an English word with a long vowel that precedes 2 consonants, then just tell me. See if you can come up with it. A woman came up with it 90 seconds the other night at a bar. But
roller.
Wow. That was what? Like 9 seconds. That's good. That's not the one that she came up with. That's really good. There's a whole bunch of Italian words. Italian is, well, we could talk about that another time. I'll just read 3 sections here, to give you a taste of the book. Everybody asks me about the crime. This is a book about lots of things, but everyone wants to know about the crime. So I'll read a chapter about the crime. But first I'll just read the beginning just to get you acquainted with my town. It's chapter 1, last stop, Chadron, Nebraska. I first came across Chadron, Nebraska by accident in 1994. I had borrowed a car, thrown all my meager belongings in the back, and driven west, the direction of escape after disaster, the direction of decline in the setting sun. I intended to kill myself. The farther you go west, the higher the suicide rate gets, and I thought perhaps that would give me the momentum I needed. In America, we remake ourselves, though it rarely works out. I was 38, $5,000 in debt from a school loan that I'd wasted by dropping out of school, an aborted attempt at becoming a drug counselor. All my beliefs about sacrificing everything to become a novelist had amounted to nothing. To top it all off, I had just come off a dizzying romantic flop with a Spanish professor I had no business being with in the first place. I had been drifting for some time, starting all over freshly unknown, in a new town, 15 states in the last 10 years, without any measurable results. The road had long lost its savor. I was not in the best state of mind. It was no coincidence that I was about as far away as I could get from the people I loved. A funny thing happened when I arrived in Chadron, however, a bucolic, hardscrabble, sandblasted prairie town of 5,000 in the northwest corner of the state, the Panhandle as it's called. Elevation 3,400 feet, a quaint, forested, friendly old snow still on the ground in Maytown. Chadron had a water tower, grain elevators, a tanning salon, a video rental store, which is just closed, a small liberal arts college, a Hardee's, a stoplight, and a curling yellow sign in the pet store window that read, "Hamsters and tarantulas featured today." There were abandoned houses everywhere. It felt like a dying town politely hanging on. I felt akin. I felt indebted. I thought, we can't all win the game, so why not just shut up for a change and be satisfied with what you have? Why not just be a good neighbor and live an honorable life and take out the trash? Why not stop torturing yourself about fame and art? Why not relent, marry a reformed hooker, buy some old furniture and a ping pong table, become a Cornhusker fan, open a dusty bottle of Kentucky Straight, turn on the Rockies game, and enjoy the brief time you have left on this weird planet of sorrow? Most people would live in an outhouse in Bangladesh before they would voluntarily move to Nebraska. They drive through the state on I-80 and think of it in a vague, resentful way as a flat expanse of interminable boredom sparsely populated with pigs, rednecks, and blue-eyed howdies juggling their nuts among the deep rows of sweet corn. Nebraska? Are you kidding me? I heard the same Nebraska joke twice before I got here. Custer says to his men, "Got good news and bad. Good news is that we're all going to be massacred at Little Bighorn. Bad news is that we have to cross Nebraska to get there." The Panhandle of Nebraska is actually more like Colorado in flavor, and in some ways it's like all the high plains down to, into Mexico. With topographical variation, forest, buttes, bluffs, black cowboy hats, gun racks in the pickup trucks, craggy, sinewy faces, cloud formations like lost civilizations, not much corn except for the ethanol fortune seekers fouling up the water table, and the insistent message of self-reliance. The town has been poor since it can remember. One reason people are so inclined to cooperate. The land is dominated by wheat, cows, and education. Unlike the rest of Nebraska, Chadron doesn't quite sit on the Great Ogallala Aquifer. Do you sit on the Great Ogallala Aquifer? It comes down into Texas. I know you do. So there isn't much water here. The closest lake is 20 miles. It rains about 16 inches a year. Western Nebraska is the only place in all my travels where I have seen the dust blowing and the rain falling at the same time. Don't clap. Don't clap. I should. Let me just read the second one, because then now we'll just get to some of the people in Chadron and a little bit more about well, I don't need to. This is just, it's all. I knew that local color would really separate this. When you deal with true crime, it's a very limiting genre, and as I say, it's often just the heartless milking of human misery. And in order to alleviate that, some of the better true crime books like Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil and obviously In Cold Blood are very place-oriented. And so I've done that too. And it was really fun for me to do that because this is an unusual place in almost every way. I rented a room this is called City of Barking Dogs. I rented a room at the Roundup Motel out on the highway, right across from the Chuck Wagon restaurant for $16 a night. The room was solid with homey touches, doilies, and a real quilted counterpane and pine wainscoting. The small phone book listed the businesses and residencies of 4 states. In the weekly paper, the Shadron Record, amid the softball scores, the courthouse news, the sermon of the week, the super cheap houses, and the very few jobs available, I found a textual antidepressant called Police Beat, a log of the latest week's calls to the Shadron Police Department. 5:24 p.m., caller from the 400 block of Chapin Street stated that the dog across the street is not supposed to be outside because it is so small. She stated that the dog should be inside, and if the owners didn't want it, she would buy it from them. Officer told caller that he could not require the owner to sell the dog. Officer then inspected the dog, and it was not lacking in anything. Officer informed caller that just because the dog is not played with does not make it abused. And I've punctuated or seasoned the whole book with police beats to sort of reinforce the idea of how quirky and pretty inactive this town is. 7:13 p.m., caller from the 500 block of King Street advised that somebody cut his clothesline in his backyard and hung a scarecrow on it. He advised he just wanted it on record. He also advised that he was going to keep the scarecrow if nobody wanted it. 1:26 a.m., caller from the 300 block of Lake Street advised he just got home from the bar and his truck had been wrecked. Caller stated he didn't drive tonight because he knew he'd be drunk. In the Shadron Record, I also found a shack for $150 a month in the alley off Mears Street, not far from the Native American Center, 1 block north of the railroad tracks. This had once been a railroad town. There had also been a Swedish tooled flour mill along the tracks that had burned down long ago. Any hopes of rebuilding the flour mill had been dashed by the cost of the new parts required from Sweden. My new home was 2 rooms, furnished bathtub and toilet, a small yard with 2 tall Siberian elms, a bit rough, as the agent described it, with a small Smithsonian refrigerator that froze all my vegetables, giving new meaning to the word crisper. In the bedroom was Betsy Ross's original mattress, the broken springs of which stuck up through the fabric like the tails of welded pigs. The whole nightly experience rather like lying on a bed of nails, though you could arrange your body on the mattress the way a river arranges itself through a forest. And it was better any day than a hard chair in a bus terminal or the front seat of a borrowed car at a rest stop. My life was settled. 1 cup, 1 plate, 1 fork, 1 knife, a spoon, a Bible, fingernail clippers, radio scissors, hydrogen peroxide, toothpaste, notebooks, grease-stained raiment, pots and pans, and pens all in their proper places, a hamburger in a styrofoam container, a dead grasshopper, an emaciated spider, a gallon of red wine, 3 packages of old golds. How many times have I done this, vowed to end my days, started over, lied to myself about settling down, believed that something essential in me had changed when nothing of the kind had happened? And how long would it be before I was packing up all my crap and running off again? Though Shadron is a Lakota word for city of barking dogs, and each resident is required to tie his dog up in the yard until it barks itself unconscious, presumably to frighten off coyotes, there are times when the peace of this town, the quiet of inaction, is so thick that you have to get up and check out the window to see if the world has not come to an end. Time here is as big as the sky, especially when you don't know anyone. So I would take long walks through town, past the abandoned homes, the rows of trailers and prefabs, the original 19th century log cabins, the classic Puritan boxes, the Dutch bungalows, the Georgian mansionettes, with their wide porticoed verandas and weeping birch trees out front. Sometimes I walked up into the hills south of campus. There were trails that led back into the hinterland. If you walked far enough south, the pine forest resumed, and this would be where the professor was eventually found, which is why I take such care to sort of paint the thing before, and I'm doing as much work as I can, establishing characters and places and platforms so that when I hit the story that I can pretty much run through it without having to catalog and backflash and so on. Standing up here, you could see the curve of the earth and great floating rafts of rain like islands made out of iron and whipped cream. The year before, when I'd quit school mid-semester, it was curious that the professor who had taught Beowulf would be the one to insist I see him in his office. I called him from a payphone instead. He urged me to stay in school. He insisted that I had much to offer. My grades were good enough to make me eligible for many privileges, including an assistant teaching position and the probability of a handsome fellowship. He wondered what I would do if I quit school without a degree. I told him I did not know what I would do, but I wanted something more for my life's work than a bench named after me or a memorial tree. I didn't want to be comfortable in the cafeteria with the vents blowing Alzheimer's spores all around and an unopened volume of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow in my lap. "Do you remember where the glory in Beowulf is?" I asked him. "It is out amid peril and strange lands, pitted against monsters and the mothers of monsters. It isn't in the warm mead hall with roasted meats and the comfort of jesters and wenches." Sometimes you can hear a nod on the other end of the line. He was silent for a time. I don't think he ever dreamed that anything he taught would have this kind of effect on a student. He let me go after that, even wished me luck. In spite of the fact that I'd already laboriously composed 14 complete novels unfit to print, the recollection of this adolescent fantasy, and also the fact that I had nothing else really to do, made me want to write another. If the horse throws you off, get back on, even if it kicks you in the head and you suffer irreversible brain damage. Who's going to notice? Wasn't Thomas Pynchon kicked by a horse? My trusty 286 word processor had burned up in the Iowa summer heat the year before, and I didn't have the cash to replace it. But I had never been able to write anything worthwhile on a machine anyway, so I decided to write my next novel longhand. Name all the great novels written on word processors. If Dickens had a word processor, Great Expectations would have been the first novel to circumnavigate the globe. My new novel sustained me. It was my psychological Jesus: comfort, purpose, magic, ego loss, spirit, transformation, companionship, salvation, sacrifice. I jotted down gems on napkins, chanted sage insights, sotto voce, until memorized. Butte is the other one that the woman came up with. Butte is one of those. But I suppose there's a whole bunch of, double L. That's holler. Anyway. And remarked on an angle or light or a gesture. I snatched up my 110 Mead notebook and scrawled epiphanies into the margins. The novel was my mad lover and my only faithful friend. It sang to me its sea nymph song as the alley dogs yapped and the homeless Indians combed through the dumpsters for aluminum cans, as I shopped for green discount meat at Safeway, as the grasshoppers munched through the blasted verdure and the tumbleweeds bounced along on their way east or south. Now and then I would lean back in my chair and think of my academic debt, my enforced jack-off solitude, the stubborn lifetime of menial jobs that awaited me. No wonder I was so depressed. This is depressing, too. This is what the USPS did for me. They delivered a book like this, so it's totally useless. Any questions before I read another section? I'm just going to switch topics, and I'm going to read a piece of the actual crime, because that's the center of this story. I don't like to milk the misery of people's misfortunes, but that's pretty much what makes this book exist, and that's where the real interest of readers generally is. I've done a number of readings, and the Q&A afterwards, there's like one question about my son who, was not diagnosed with autism, but only because we didn't want a diagnosis. I can get a diagnosis anytime I want. I really don't know what good it'll do. So So I put him on the ASD since the diagnosis is available. So, but the rest of the 99 questions would be about the circumstances of the crime and the family's opposition to my exploration of it, the dissatisfaction of some of the people who were named as potential suspects in the murder, and so on and so forth. So I'm obliged to read a piece of that. But any questions so far? We can do questions afterwards if you like as well. Or you can just look at me if you want. Although I think that's a better likeness. Okay, this will serve two purposes. It'll introduce my son, and it's the first time we meet Stephen Hadia, who was the theoretical. Well, that's all in here. This is chapter 13. My publisher and her homicide cop fiance come to Shadron. On a snowy day in late November, 5-year-old Tom, that's my son, and I drove out to the 2-flights-a-day airport 4 miles west of town to pick up my publisher, Rhonda Hughes, and her fiancé, Kevin Warren, a homicide detective for the Portland, Oregon Police Department. And he helped me a great deal in my informal, because it wasn't an official investigation, but he helped me a great deal examining forensics, establishing potential scenarios, evaluating suspects, and so on and so forth. My son loved the Shadron Municipal Airport, loved taking planes and traveling, and even though he disliked children and had no friends, he loved having guests. Just weeks after starting kindergarten, Tom had been red flagged as autistic. The symptomatology went something like slow verbal development, poor social development, repetitive and ritual behaviors, especially rocking and foot bouncing, tactile obsessions, fixations, advanced facility with numbers and numerical concepts, wandering attention. Because Tom met your gaze, smiled readily, pointed to indicate, drank water from a martini glass, owned 2 rubber skeletons he'd named Thing and Baby Love, refused to eat anything that might be healthy for him, claimed he would be an alligator when he grew up, and was never once tempted by Barney the purple dinosaur. I didn't think he was any more autistic than I was. The father, like his son, is non-standard, a bit slow, has trouble focusing on things that don't interest him, is taking longer than the usual time to develop. He is hypersensitive to stimuli, especially loud sounds and nonsense. He is inclined to withdraw, a constructor of secret worlds, seems narrow in affect, and can listen to that Paul Simon song, Mother and Child Reunion, over and over. Nevertheless, on recommendation of school staff, an occupational therapist, special education teacher, the school counselor, the principal, and Tom's teacher, Tom began seeing a pediatrician who eventually referred us to a psychologist, an autism expert in Casper, Wyoming, about 3 hours away. Tom liked the long monthly drives to the place he called Casper, Wyoming, and he enjoyed the testing and interviews and remembers all his doctors to this day. He could recall the names of his entire extended family in Mexico 2 years after having only seen them once. But exceptional memory is another red flag of autism, isn't it? The plane was late. Tom washed his hands twice, studied the buttons on the coffee maker, pressed his nose against the glass to watch the snow, and announced that in the year 3000 everyone would have 4 eyes. At last the small single-engine craft landed, and Rhonda and Kevin, ducking whirling flurries, came through the doors. Rhonda, a slim, urbane, and successful woman of 39 years, hugged me, one-armed around the waist, and kissed my cheek. Rhonda made her living as a print broker, but had started up a small publishing outfit 7 years before. So far, I'd published 4 books with her, and Rhonda and I had become good friends. Whenever I went to Portland on a book tour, I bunked at her 9th-story loft downtown, and we stayed up drinking and confessing long into the night. We'd both grown up stoner beach children in San Diego, and Rhonda had rescued me editorially numerous times. She'd also taught me how to tell if a woman has had a boob job or not. Rhonda was also an admirer of the Shadron Record's weekly published police beats, the local color gems culled from the Shadron. Is that my phone or? The local color gems culled from the Shadron Police Department blotter, which she believed would somehow provide the key to a full-fledged literary project about Shadron, Nebraska. Though a narrative built around an item such as 7:09 p.m. caller from North Main Street advised she thought she needed to go to the loony bin, had thoroughly escaped me so far. Kevin, 40, a liberal policeman with a wry sense of humor, brushed the snowflakes from the sleeves of his coat and said, "Do you think you've gotten far enough away from civilization yet?" I admitted that I hadn't and shook his hand. Kevin's father died when he was young, and he had the saturnine bearing of a child looking out the window all alone at the falling autumn leaves. His hair was thinning. He wore a neat goatee. An Oregon native, he went to Atlantic City once in the folly of his youth, pursuing a woman who had no interest in him, and spent a year or so as a paramedic there, mostly hauling fat guys with heart attacks out of Trump casinos. Though Rhonda and Kevin had only been dating for a year, they'd met on Match.com. Kevin and I had already become good friends, too. He'd picked me up on my last book tour at the Portland airport in a police cruiser, and later that trip we had sojourned together to Seattle, where I'd read at Elliott Bay Book Company to an audience of 16, where I met Tom Robbins, then spent the rest of the evening at various bars watching college football games. Lifelong city dwellers, both Rhonda and Kevin had never seen the Great Plains of western Nebraska. Tom was enchanted by his new guests and the stuffed toy beaver they brought him, a tiny mascot of Kevin's favorite college team, the Oregon State Beavers. "Don't you know what?" he asked Rhonda, who had slid into the back seat next to him. "What?" "That snowstorm is coming from the northwest." Rhonda rubbed his head. "And when we get home, we can have Easter eggs," he told her. "White Easter eggs," he said. He meant hard-boiled eggs, which he had just learned to like. He liked them plain, without salt, any time of the day. "Easter eggs are Italian eggs," he said. Tom delighted most people with his diamond brightness of smile, his mother's good looks, and that natural child directness of emotion and vulnerable purity of innocence. But he could also be remote. I watched him once for a few hours through a one-way mirror of his class at the Child Development Center, and he treated his mates as if they were ghosts. When he encountered another child, he would simply ice him with indifference. And though he was warm to his teachers and caregivers, he could detach from us as well. He'd go into himself for long periods alone, oblivious as a cosmonaut to the outside world, composing on his dry erase board or rummaging through his toys in the closet. No doubt he had a distinct and winning personality, but sometimes it would recede, leaving in its wake a dark-eyed boy who merely resembled our son. On the drive home, I showed Rhonda and Kevin around the little haven I had stumbled upon in the darkest days of my life a dozen years ago. One of the big appeals of Chadron, in spite of its viral plastic enfranchisement along the highway, is the agreeable lethargy that presides over all. "What in heaven's name are you doing in this God-forsaken place?" I'm often asked. "Well, I like it here," is all I can say, and so do my wife and son. "What keeps this town from drying up and blowing away?" Kevin wanted to know. "Walmart," I replied, "and the State College to the south. You've got daylight donuts, too," he observed, his hands beginning to tremble. "Do they have savannas? And is it possible to write about policemen without at least cracking one donut joke?" The snowflakes grew larger, zigzagging down like lacy tissue paper patterns cut by exceptional children with scissors, and Tom had begun to laugh at some private reflection. He was more of a daydreamer than a thinker, I suspected, though he never told his mother and me what he might be dreaming of or thinking about. Stephen Hadia, Chadron's new math professor, with his outsized wire specs sliding down his nose, shuffled heedlessly through the drifts in his Birkenstocks in front of us. Fresh from the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, where he'd just earned his Ph.D., he'd slipped into town without most noticing, the same way he would leave us. And even though his body would be eventually discovered, the reasons for his death and disappearance would not. All I knew about him then was from two mutual friends. Dean Tucker, a philosophy professor, and Kathy Barr, a literature professor, had told me. He had perfect pitch. He was compulsively neat. He was a brilliant theoretician, and he possessed a fine and subtle wit. His strides were long, and he limped slightly from a recently broken hip. If I'd known what was going to happen to him, I would have run him over then and there, hit him hard enough to break his other hip, put him back in a wheelchair to sing in his office and cipher semi-cubical parabola and quadratic equations for another 10 or 20 years. Now, unfortunately, I'll just read the part where his body is found 95 days after he disappeared. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. I had this marked, but I just pulled the marker out, so I have to find it now. There it is. A rancher found his body. The rancher was supposedly looking for a stray steer and came upon its body. I think that there's more to it than that. That's all cataloged in the book. Chapter 49, Twilight Zone Shit. Sheriff Sean Connigan got the call that Thursday on his way back from a meeting 60 miles south in Alliance, a railroad city I call for the entertainment of my son, Alliance and tigers and bears, oh my. 1065, dead body, about half a mile southeast of campus on the May Queen Ranch, Sandy Bird's place, private ranch land. He thought, of course, of the professor who'd been missing now for more than 3 months. Even if that area had supposedly been thoroughly searched, his thoughts were the same as mine. Who else could it be? From the 5 boroughs of New York to the howling plains of nowhere, Sheriff Connigan has seen a lot in his day, hundreds of bodies and their misarranged parts, the muddle of minds and methods gone mad, the misery of passion overflowed, the love of excitement that runs roughshod over all reason, the lies that never stop being told. Having run the jail for over 2 decades, he'd witnessed the gamut of humanity, excuse my nearsightedness, heard every story, prosecuted just about every crime, but he'd never seen a case like this one, nothing close. 1065s are not common dispatches in an agricultural county with a population of little more than 9,000. There are further code suffixes, J1, J2, and J3, to describe the circumstances, but none were given. There was a reason for this. Neither the identity of the body nor the means by which it had ceased to function could be ascertained. It was a mild spring day, wind out of the southwest, those furry rocket trail clouds crisscrossing the sky. Sheriff Connigan drove south up Ridgeview Road at the eastern edge of town till it changed to dirt, followed the first 90-degree turn onto private property, the May Queen Ranch, and bounced up in the hills, the ridge ahead lined with burned ponderosas. And there had been a terrible fire just before he'd arrived, in which that beautiful stretch of pine forest had largely been incinerated, and they've reseeded the hills, but it's pretty tough for the ponderosas to survive, much less to come back. So it's still licorice stick forest out there. And bounced up into the hills, the ridge ahead lined with burned ponderosas, lifeless as the shadows they cast, a black forest of the most literal kind. Once you leave the unpaved ranch roads and discounting the sidewalk that runs along the apron of the campus and the football practice and archery field, there is no thoroughfare to carry traffic into that area. Only trails, washes, cuts, ravines. This area is negotiated by foot, horse, motorcycle, or ATV. Students occasionally roam up here for Mother Nature and beer. Their names and scholarly reflections are carved into the rocks. Lydia, Jesus, fuck. Connigan slowed his white Ford 150 pickup when he saw 2 emergency units along with Bird's Yamaha Rhino parked at the base of the ridge ahead. His deputy Jarvis Wallage was already there with Lieutenant Hickstein from the Shadron PD. Slim Buttes and Sandy. Slim Buttes was the ranch hand, and I've changed a lot of names here, so that's not his real name, but he was the one who found the body. Slim Buttes and Sandy Bird is the one who owns the property. Were also present, pale under their hats and blinking in the frosty slants of sunlight. Deputy Jarvis had been the first to respond to the call. "Where's the body?" said Connigan, making his way through the trees, looking around, seeing nothing, thinking it might have been a mistake or that the body was buried or had been moved. Jarvis pointed. Connigan still didn't see it. He moved closer. "Holy shit," were his first words, followed by a more reflective, "Holy shit." On first glance, he thought the body looked more like a charred log tied to a tree. "You might have walked right by it," he told me, "if you hadn't been paying close attention." Sheriff Connigan couldn't tell at first if the black, ransacked mass straining against the slackness of its ligatures was badly decomposed or badly burned. As he drew closer, it became clear that the body was severely burned. In his words, 99.9% burned. Burned to the bone and black as the end of time. What little unconsumed flesh remained, such as the right calf and the back of the right arm, had leathered and was marbled with red and purulent streaks of yellow. The corpse was face down, ankles crossed, arms bowed as if embracing a lover or protecting a comrade from a grenade explosion. The round wire-rimmed glasses had been knocked askew but were still hanging from one ear, lenses intact. Except for the smoked and ripped hiking boots, socks, and a patch of blue jean, all clothing was gone. He was more burned front side than back, so after they unbound the body from the tree and placed it on the pink rubber tarp, it looked more like a black mummy exhumed from the depths of an Egyptian sarcophagus. Cottigan thought the cadaver looked like something from a war photo, a napalm victim, which is a funny thing to say considering what we'll learn later. A grotesque sculpture of perpetual anguish. The left hand was so thoroughly burned that it was free of flesh and cartilage, and some of the bone had gone to ash. You couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, Cottigan recalled, though we were pretty sure who it was. I was leaning down there getting a closer look when a mouse blew out of the chest. I said, "Oh, shit." State Patrol was notified. The area was taped off. Sheriff line, do not cross. Deputy Sheriff Jarvis Wallage took a few dozen photographs. The mobile forensics team was called from Scottsbluff, 2 hours away. The officers started looking from different angles, trying to figure out what might have happened. Fresh talent kept arriving. Drinkwater and Fitzgerald from State Patrol, County Attorney Coroner Vance Haug, and Officer Joni Behrens, who would not sleep that night for the image of the mouse infestation in the cadaver's chest. We all thought at first it was a suicide, the sheriff told me, but the ankles were bound. Although the body was bound by its midsection to a tree, the hands and arms were free. His body at some point had apparently fallen forward into his campfire. There was an empty bottle of peppermint schnapps on the ground, an unopened bottle of water, a scattering of charcoal briquettes, and a few other indeterminable items melted or incinerated. There were a number of highly unusual features. You read about things like this, of course, Sheriff Cottigan said. You're trained for it, but I had no experience. The upper body burned to bone and the tree that he was tied to not burned. The area all around him barely burned. How does that happen? It was Twilight Zone shit. And I didn't have the staff or time to deal with it. I got prisoners, paperwork. I was up to my ass in alligators. So I turned the case over on the spot to State Patrol. Matt Fitzgerald became the lead investigator. Mobile forensics arrived. The body was ID'd from the serial number on the orthopedic implant. No surprise. Kind of a grim place to close, eh? But I know you've seen a lot of those forensic shows, so it probably is like nothing at all. Anyway, where are we time-wise? Are we through?
You can take questions, or we can first apply.
Oh. Yeah, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you've got. Clint's always got one, then I'll get to you next.
When you were thinking, when you realized that you were going to write at least parts of a crime book, did like Capote come to your head? And then
Oh, yeah.
And Good and Evil. And did you go and look at them again?
Yeah.
Read them in the first time?
I did,
were
yeah.
Were you afraid of like absorbing their voices?
No.
Or were they just informed you?
No, I've got my own voice now. I don't worry too much about... I was more interested in The Garden of Good and Evil because that's a book that appears to be a travelogue about Savannah. It's a very charming little piece. And then on page 38, I think it is, you discover that there's a murder in the middle of it. And the book, again, the book's energy resides on the crime. So the travelogue of Savannah, charming as it is just a bonus. It's just sort of like a wrapping for the real energy in this thing. And I didn't study it, but I just saw, how he'd done it. In Cold Blood is something I didn't go back to, but I don't read true crime. I've read a few here and there. I'm really not interested in it, not at least in writing it. It's so often poorly done, and it's done in a way that just preys on the basest human emotion. So I really wasn't interested in it, and I thought, well, how can I make this a more human story? And Capote does it by, brilliant prose style, but he's also telling us about the community, Kansas. I can't remember the name of it, but so it's a good deal of it's heavily relies on place for its effect and for the salvation of the final delivery. Yeah.
I was just wondering, on a more cheerful note, how did you meet your wife, Christina?
I was down in Mexico teaching English, and she was one of my students, and I thought she was kind of cute. and we.
So she moved up to. I'm sorry, I can't say.
Yeah, Shadron. Well, I said Denton, didn't I? I said Denton. So if I say Denton, you can say whatever. You can pronounce Shadron any way you like. Yeah, she just had these. She wasn't good. She had no chance at this. She was supposed to move up and do a class. She was supposed to get certified that she could speak a certain amount of conversational English, and she couldn't do any of that. So I started helping her after class. It looked like, a subterfuge maybe to some, but I really wanted to help her. And then, we started just going out, and one thing led to another. She had all these cute little innocent American dreams, very modest dreams. And I didn't have anything better to do, so I said, let's give it a try. Yes.
I'm concerned about these people that are targeting you. Do you think that these are people who really might harm you, or are they people that have something to do with this?
I think they could harm me, yeah.
Or do you think they just don't like you writing about their town?
Yeah, well, there's all of that, and it depends on who this person is who's looking for me. The people who killed Stephen Hadia, I have a very good idea, and I pretty much I don't have enough evidence to accuse anybody, so it's a circumstantial intimation, let's call it that, and it's pretty strong. After you review the evidence, I think you'll probably agree with me. Maybe not, though. But yeah, anybody who killed Stephen Hadia would certainly kill me. The only problem with that would be that they'd blow their cover. So I'm really actually more worried about people who might be disgruntled at a particular portrayal. And that probably wouldn't translate into murder. But I'm not going to be totally logical about this, because this book in my community has sparked a very strong reaction, and it's hate and love. And most of it is there's quite a bit of positive, especially the people who wanted to know what actually happened. Because if you go to that town, if you would have gone to this town 3 months ago and asked them what happened to Stephen Hadia, they would have told you that he was bound to a tree with barbed wire. And that's not the case. People are still saying that. And they thought that he was gay, and they thought that he was remote, and they thought that he was socially awkward. He was none of those things. He was a brilliant, wonderful, kind, funny man. And I just thought, wow, what a waste. And he was a treasure. He was so far ahead of his contemporaries, the people he taught math with, that they didn't know what he was talking about. But he would explain it to them, even though they still wouldn't understand it. So, I'm worried. And I'm not the kind of person who I don't write. I'm not an investigative journalist. So undertaking this thing I knew was a great risk. I'm less worried about my own welfare than I am about my wife and son, especially my son at school. What's that? I would in a heartbeat if I had any money, but I don't have the wherewithal. So I've just got to face it. It's good for me. It just toughens me up, It's definitely something new, because most writers just hide out and clean their glasses every now and then. Who else had a question? Was there another question? Well, we can. Yeah.
On God Clobbers Us All, on the cover of that novel, you did I thought the cutest thing where you made a bunch of fake blurbs from famous dead authors.
Yeah.
Who've been dead for decades.
Yeah.
Clearly couldn't have written this.
Yeah.
One of which I think is just Hemingway kind of brooding about his own life and not even mentioning it.
Right. Well, he was kind of egotistical.
Yeah. And where you got the idea for that? And since, it is kind of a ballsy thing. There are people in the more nitpicky literary journals who would say, oh, he's presumptuous for daring to fake these people's voices.
Yeah, but, nobody's taking that too seriously, I don't think. I did get a lot of criticism. I caught a lot of flack for it, but I hate blurbs. They're insincere. They give you no idea what the book's about. They're, I got a bunch of nice blurbs from people that I know. We have our little mutual admiration society, Cheryl Strayed, Marion Winnick. Tom Robbins, of course, is fresh, and there's some other people who stepped in and legitimately like the book. But blurbs are a total waste of time. I think they're part of the, they're one of the less savory aspects of the publishing business. And it's hard to get blurbs because you've got to get them from, from John Irving and all of these people, because otherwise they don't have any effect on somebody who just picks up the book and does this. they'll probably look at the back of the book and see what, Joyce Carol Oates said about it. And, if Joyce liked it, then, I'll buy it.
Kind of like, Stephen King, well, he loves everything. Anybody else?
Right, yeah, and as a matter of fact, we had Stephen King on the line because one of the interns had gone to school with somebody's sister who had taken out the garbage for him, and whatever, but it didn't work out. It doesn't matter. I mean, I really dislike that, but I've got to, I got to play the game to some extent. So, any other questions? Yeah.
How were you able to get so close to the crime evidence? Like, were you
Yeah.
protected firsthand, or was
Yeah, when I got access. Eventually, I got access to just about everything. I didn't get full access, but I got to see the crime scene photographs and some of the police reports, and reviewed the autopsy. It was enough for me, and I can't divulge my sources. But when you live in a small town, I've lived there for 11 years, and I'm very, I'm not prominent, but I'm highly social, and I know lots of people, and I have. Until this book came out, I had just like a sterling reputation, and I could just open doors. People wanted to help me. And if I didn't know somebody who could help me, I knew someone who could get that person to help me. So the small town thing worked for me. It worked for me, and now it's working against me to some extent. Anyway, any other questions? Yeah.
So you think it's going to calm down, right?
Yeah, I would hope so.
Well, yeah. I mean, they're going to get over it.
Yeah. That's what I've been told. I'm waiting for that. I can't wait for that to happen. Yeah.
Maybe one more question?
Yeah.
You ever going to get your hair cut there again?
Here?
Your haircut with the
Oh, I never did go there. My point, I talked about Roger the Bubblegum Barber. There's a chapter called Roger the Bubblegum Barber, and it's the only barber my son will go to because he's got bubble gum. We went to the other barber, and the guy was out of bubble gum. That was it for Tom. We're never going back to this guy. And the other one had titty magazines in it. I didn't, but I guess it didn't have titty magazines in it. I don't know. I did make some mistakes in here. I've caught like 3 or 4 mistakes, and that's probably another one. I probably have to do a retraction. He was so vicious with me, though. I don't really feel like I think he owes me now because, and I said to him, "Is it really that big a deal, barber shop with titty magazines? Is it that big of a deal? You really think that I've undermined your business and destroyed your reputation? That's standard issue in most barbershops, especially in small towns in the Midwest, or at least it was because I'd gotten my hair cut there in '94, and I haven't been back since because we go to the bubblegum barber, Roger the Bubblegum Barber." I guess that's it, huh? Yeah, I'll be out there.